If you're not one of those people who thinks the government hides countless secrets and constantly covers things up, well, you'd be absolutely right. I'm one of the many they hire to clean up their mistakes. I'm not sure why they chose me. There's nothing special about me, but perhaps that's exactly why. I was already a loner, living a life so dull I was ready for any kind of change. I wasn't going to cure cancer or create the next weapon of mass destruction, so I was disposable. One day, after finishing my shift at a fast food joint, they came to me. Men in suits, vague and unspoken in their approach. They didn't tell me what I'd be doing, only that if I wanted to serve my country, to follow their orders. I didn't look back once. As strange as it all seemed, I don't regret it. The next year of my life was grueling. I was put through extreme physical and mental training. I learned things I thought were only in movies. What would have happened if I failed? I don't want to know. But I knew one thing for sure, they wouldn't have let me go back to my normal life. They wouldn't let me walk away. Not once, in that year, did they tell me what I was training for. Not until I graduated. After receiving the seal of approval from the higher-ups, I was brought into a small room filled with men in black suits. They finally informed me of my new role. I was going to hunt down failed experiments and other oddities the government couldn't contain. Some missions would be easy, others would be next to impossible. Most would give me the option, bring the target back dead or alive, though of course, alive would always be preferable. For further experimentation. My first assignment was supposed to be one of the easy ones. Codename, the Ice Cream Man. At one point, he was human, like most failed experiments. He looked like your typical ice cream truck driver. But that's where the similarities end. Now, he's essentially a robot, only concerned with doing his job. But what makes him special? I'll tell you, it's his truck. The ice cream truck itself is the real anomaly. The music it plays, that haunting jingle, isn't just a song. It's like a human magnet. It pulls people in, makes them approach the truck, regardless of the consequences. And once you get there, you'll buy the ice cream. I've heard it tastes delicious. But you'll never know, because anyone who eats it falls into a fugue state for 12 hours. You go about your day, but the next morning, you won't remember a thing. You'll remember nothing. I'm sure you can see why that would be valuable to the government. The problem was, the scientists testing it underestimated the ice cream. And before they knew it, 12 hours had passed. They woke up, wondering where their test subject went. That's when they sent me. Simple assignment, right? I was given noise-blocking earplugs to cancel out the sound of the truck's jingle and sent to the last known location of the ice cream man. Finding him was easy, just follow the lines of cars waiting for a taste. After all, who could resist? Once the truck served its last customer, I got in line. He tried to serve me, but I wasn't there for a treat. I reached into the truck and injected him with a tranquilizer. The ice cream man may have been more machine than man, but he wasn't immune to good old-fashioned drugs. I tied him up, hitched his truck to my vehicle, and drove him straight to the nearest government facility. Another job done. Or so I thought. That was the easy one. The next one? Codename, the Riddler. Unlike the ice cream man, the Riddler was still mostly human. He hadn't lost his emotions or humanity. Well, maybe that was the problem. Through intense experimentation, the Riddler had gained the ability to create concentrated earthquakes. And he'd already collapsed a facility just by using his powers. The main concern wasn't just his powers, it was the danger he posed to everyone around him. If he used his ability in a populated area, lives would be lost. This was one of the few cases where they told me not to bring him back alive. Once again, I felt like this assignment was another test. But a different kind of test. The government wanted to see if I could kill for them, without hesitation. If I did it, there would truly be no escape for me. But that was fine. I had no intentions of leaving. The Ripper was a bit more difficult to track down, mostly because he wasn't trying to attract attention. But when the government wants you, they find you. He'd relocated to a small town, changed his name, his face, everything, just to escape. I almost felt sorry for the guy. I doubt he volunteered to become a guinea pig for the government, and all he wanted now was to live a normal life. Once I found the town, I kept my distance. I didn't want him going nuclear on me. Then, after confirming his identity with some DNA samples I'd swiped from his trash, all that was left was to take him down. I didn't want to kill him, but I didn't have a lot of options. The scientists who created him were unsure of the extent of his powers and how well he could control them. If I brought him in alive, there's no telling if the government even had a facility that could hold him. I did what I thought was best. One night, as he returned home, I put a bullet between the Ripper's eyes. It wasn't a good feeling, but I kept convincing myself that it was necessary. I dropped his body off, got thanked for my services. But it wouldn't get easier from here. My next target? Codename, Ghoul. This one was truly a monster. I'm not sure what the government was trying to create, but I don't think they got what they wanted. Ghoul had enhanced strength and speed, but with one slight problem: he eats humans. Who knows? Maybe that was exactly what the government wanted. As you can imagine, Ghoul eventually escaped. You'd think these government scientists would get better at containing these experiments, but that doesn't seem to be the case. This mission wouldn't have been so bad, except I was given strict orders to bring Ghoul back alive. All my lethal weapons were stripped away and replaced with tranquilizers strong enough to bring down a rhino. I put in a request for a partner, but, of course, I was swiftly denied. Ghoul had taken residence in a forest. It wouldn't have been so bad, except this forest was a popular hiking trail and there had been frequent disappearances. Many had been chalked up to suicides, but since Ghoul showed up, the numbers had significantly increased. The government did me a solid and shut down the trail for the weekend, so it would just be me and Ghoul. No one else would get in the way. I'd always wanted to go on a hiking trip, but this wasn't exactly what I had pictured. I set off into the woods, looking for signs of his nest. I'll admit, I hadn't showered in a week in preparation. If Ghoul came to me, it would make my job easier. And I knew he'd be hungry. After about an hour of tracking, I came across some signs, footprints, markings. And then, balanced human bones. I was getting closer. A few more minutes of following the trail, and I heard it. Movement. The branches of the tree shaking. He was drawing near. And then, just like that, he was there. Ghoul stood on a large tree, watching me, studying me. He wasn't that big, maybe 5 feet 6 inches with an average frame, but looks can be deceiving. His skin was a sickly yellow, his hair receding as though he were an old man, but he was clearly much younger. His eyes? Pure white. There was nothing left behind them. He stared at me for a moment, and I thought I had a few seconds to get ready. I was wrong. With the speed of a video game character, he soared from the tree, landing directly on top of me. I barely had time to pull out a tranquilizer and shove it into his side, but it wasn't enough. Despite his strength, he seemed unaffected. And then, he took a chunk of flesh out of my shoulder. I lay there, helpless, as he chewed on my flesh. I knew it wouldn't be long before he came back for seconds. I struggled, reaching for another tranquilizer. My hand fumbled, but I managed to pull it out just before he lunged for another bite. I jammed the second tranquilizer directly into his neck. I felt his teeth begin to lock down on my neck, but just before he bit down, Ghoul passed out. I let out the biggest sigh of relief in my life. I shoved him off me, trembling, and quickly strapped on the special restraints I'd been given for him. I made sure the bindings were tight, extra tight, because this monster wasn't going to wake up and slip out of them. I wasn't sure how long the tranquilizers would last, but hopefully long enough for me to drag this beast back. Missing a chunk of my shoulder, I was still alive. And that was a small miracle in itself. But this was just one of the many monsters science had unleashed. I could only imagine what other horrors were waiting for me. After securing Ghoul, I contacted the higher-ups. I told them I needed at least a month off to recover. Given everything they'd put me through, they obliged. If anything, they seemed impressed that I was still in one piece. Those were just a few of my targets, though. I have many more stories to tell, but that'll have to wait. I just got my next assignment, and it's time to start preparing. If I survive, I'll make sure to post more updates. Hopefully, I'll be back in one piece. Before I get into my next target, I want to address a few concerns from my last post. A lot of you were worried about the bite I suffered from Ghoul. As far as I know, I haven't contracted anything. I was told that whatever they did to him shouldn't be contagious, but I had them run some tests just to be sure. All the results came back negative. They gave me some special pills to help speed up the healing of my shoulder, though I can't help but wonder if they're hiding something from me. I just hope, if I start craving human flesh, I still have the mental fortitude to pull the trigger one last time. Another thing I wanted to address is the mystery of who I work for. I always refer to my boss as the government, and that's because I have no idea which branch this is. It's possible that it isn't the government at all, but I doubt it. This operation is too ingrained to be anything else. Maybe it's the CIA, but I'm not certain. The only questions I ask are the ones that keep me alive a little longer. Now, let's talk about my next mission. After my month-long break and recovery from Ghoul, I was given an easier assignment to ease me back in. Codename Romeo. Romeo was created to be a charmer. Not just any charmer, though, he was a literal Adonis. The kind of beauty that made the statue of David look ugly. From what I could tell, he was designed to charm women, probably foreign diplomats. But in the end, he charmed anyone and everyone, which was how he managed to charm his way out of his holding cell. Despite his allure, Romeo wasn't really a danger to anyone, except perhaps himself if he ever found himself in the hands of an angry spouse. But I'm sure he could charm his way out of that, too. Finding Romeo wasn't hard. The real challenge was extracting him. He was always surrounded by a crowd, like a magnet for attention. At high-class parties, Romeo was the star of the show, and he never returned to his room without at least 10 people in tow. My job was to separate him from that entourage, and I needed a solid plan. So, I decided to attend one of his parties to get a better scope of the situation. It was crucial that I found an opening. But what I didn't expect was for Romeo to approach me first. "A good evening, monsieur. I do not believe we have met before." "I am Romeo," he said with a smile. I almost gagged. Of course he would speak French. I should have expected it. His ego was massive. "James," I responded, forcing a polite smile. "I'm kind of new here." "Nice to meet you." "James? What a fabulous name. But to be alone at a party? Unacceptable." He practically swooned. "Come with me. My friends and I are about to return to my estate, and I will show you the finer parts of the city." Was that a sexual reference? Regardless, this was going much better than I had expected. I was making direct contact with my target, and as I considered my options, I wondered if I could simply wait until everyone fell asleep and then sneak away with Romeo before anyone else knew what was happening. But I hesitated. It wasn't that simple. "Well, I don't know, we just met, and I wouldn't want to impose on you like that," I said, trying to play hard to get. "No, I insist," Romeo replied, his voice smooth as silk. "You must. Samantha, please escort James here to my home. I will join you shortly, there is someone I must see first." Samantha, a woman from his entourage, guided me to Romeo's estate. I had already known where he lived, but I had to play along. Romeo's estate was a work of art, a mansion that looked like it was pulled straight out of a video game, designed with aesthetics that screamed wealth and sophistication. Inside, I was offered a glass of scotch, aged over 100 years. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I accepted nonetheless, taking a moment to appreciate the luxury around me. An hour later, Romeo arrived, fashionably late to his own gathering. He approached me immediately. "James, follow me. There is something I must show you." I didn't hesitate. This was my chance to be alone with him. I could tranquilize him and get out of here before anyone else noticed. He led me through the estate to a room I didn't expect. The walls were covered with pictures, portraits of men and women, each with a different persona. I even recognized a few of them from his entourage. "What is this?" I asked, unable to hold back my curiosity. "These are the people I've conquered," Romeo said, turning his back to me and beginning to undress. "And you are next. Please, remove your clothing." His voice held so much power that I almost felt compelled to obey. But I resisted, managing to keep my wits about me. As I approached, I pulled the tranquilizer and shot it into his neck. He didn't even have time to react as I duct-taped his mouth shut. I had heard enough of his egotistical words for one night. Romeo was much bigger than me, and dragging him out of the window and back to my vehicle was no easy feat, but somehow, I managed. By the time I dropped him off, I'm sure his entourage thought he was just taking his time with me. That night, I made sure to shower extra well. My experience with Romeo had made me miss my date with Gull, but that would have to wait. My next assignment was already on the horizon. Codename, Kong. What happens when you splice human DNA with gorilla DNA? Apparently, you get Kong. Personally, I would have preferred the name Caesar, like in Planet of the Apes, but I didn't get to pick the names. Kong was essentially a smaller version of Bigfoot. And no, I haven't been tasked with hunting Bigfoot himself. Kong was a kill target, and unlike Gull, there were no guarantees that tranquilizers would work on him. If they did, there was no telling how long they would last. Kong had already killed 2 scientists during his escape, so they weren't too worried about bringing him back alive. They just wanted to dissect him, figure out why he laughed maniacally as he murdered. I was given specific instructions to avoid the head if at all possible. They wanted to examine his brain, and that wouldn't be possible if I splattered it all over the ground. Another issue was my inexperience with long-range weapons. While I had been trained, the focus had always been on close combat. But now, that skill was starting to seem crucial. Similar to Gull, Kong had taken up residence in a forested area. However, unlike Gull, Kong didn't seem to crave human flesh. He had chosen a more secluded location. He could have lived his life out in these woods, never bothering anyone, but that wasn't what the government wanted. My superiors had already conducted aerial sweeps of the area and pinpointed his location. All I had to do was the dirty work on the ground. I set up my sniper rifle, taking my position at a vantage point overlooking the cave where Kong had made his home. Now, all I had to do was wait. After a few hours, Kong finally emerged from the cave, stretching his limbs the way most of us do after waking up. I lined up the crosshairs over his chest, where I assumed his heart was located. I pulled the trigger, and immediately, I knew I had missed. The wind had picked up since I began waiting, and the bullet veered off to the right, hitting the rock beside Kong's cave. But Kong didn't move. Instead, he slowly turned his gaze toward me with eyes that were far too human. He didn't try to escape. He knew what was coming. If not me, it would have been someone else. Kong had accepted his fate. Unlike when I killed the Ripper, this felt different. I had taken him down while he was a slave, unaware and bound. I didn't have to see the look in his eyes before he died. But with Kong, I couldn't ignore the humanity in his expression. I almost wished he were like Ghoul, something monstrous and unnatural, because then I wouldn't have to feel guilty about what I was about to do. But hesitation was a weakness, and I couldn't afford to let it stop me. I reloaded the rifle, adjusted for the wind, and aimed once more. This time, when I pulled the trigger, I didn't miss. Bullseye. Kong dropped to the ground, lifeless. I confirmed his death quickly, checking for any signs of life. He wouldn't be suffering anymore. But I couldn't shake the feeling of disgust that gnawed at me as I looked at his body. He didn't deserve to be a monster, but that's what he was, a creation, a weapon. But I had no time to dwell on it. Kong was far too heavy for me to drag alone, so I set off a flare, signaling the air team to come collect him. As I waited for their arrival, I couldn't stop thinking about how disgusting this job was. The look in Kong's eyes had made me question my line of work for the first time. I had never felt so sickened by what I did. But there was no way out. I was already in too deep, and the government had created a monster out of me as well. Maybe one day, they'd decide they needed to dispose of me, too. But for now, I was still doing their dirty work. I left Kong's body behind and took a moment to clear my mind. I needed to lie down, to process what had happened. But I couldn't rest for long. Another assignment was already on the horizon. My next mission was called Delilah. The name might sound innocent enough, but there was nothing sweet about her. Delilah was a ventriloquist doll, a seemingly simple object with a deadly power. Unlike what you might expect, she couldn't run around at night stabbing people, but her influence was far more insidious. One look into her eyes, and you would fall under her complete control. A doll controlling humans like puppets. It was a sickening thought, but it was true. Delilah had a penchant for sadism. She would make her victims inflict as much pain as possible before finally disposing of them. If demons were real, I had no doubt that one was trapped inside her. Delilah had been living with a family of 4 when she was taken by a scientist who fell under her control. It had only been a week since the incident, but that was plenty of time for Delilah to do untold damage. The scientist returned to his workplace a day later and attempted to murder his co-workers. Fortunately, the authorities had taken care of that, but Delilah was still out there. I made my way to the family's home, hoping to find some clues or evidence. But what I found was worse than I had imagined. I knocked on the front door, but after a few minutes with no response, I turned the handle. The door creaked open, and I immediately regretted it. The stench of death hit me like a physical blow. The walls were coated in blood, some dried, some still slowly dripping. I moved cautiously into the living room, where I found the family. The mother and 2 children sat in a small triangle, their stomachs cut open and entrails hanging out. They had been posed to look as if they were eating their own organs. In the center of the triangle, the father hung from the ceiling, his body covered in scratches and cuts. But his injuries were nothing compared to what had happened to his family. Just as I was about to lose my stomach, I heard a voice from the opposite corner of the room. It was calm, almost playful. "What do you think of my art?" "It's a little sloppy, but I'm sure I'll get better with time." It was Delilah's voice. "Have you come to take me back already?" she asked. I was having such a fun time. "Well, I'm done here anyway. You can take me back now. I'll be out again soon." I moved toward the voice, carefully keeping my head low and trying not to let my disgust show. Delilah was waiting, and I wasn't sure what to expect next. I had no intention of ending up like that family. As I got closer to Delilah, I closed my eyes for a moment, steeling myself. I carefully picked her up and flipped her over, making my way back to the vehicle. I wanted to keep her in the front seat. I liked having conversations during my car rides, and besides, you can't get much action from women in this line of work, so I thought it'd be fun for both of us. Delilah spoke mockingly. "You know, you could just toss me in the back and throw a blanket over me, but you seem to want me in the front seat." "Fine, then. Just don't expect much fun from me." I didn't want her out of my line of sight. So, I granted her wish, carefully sitting her up front, turning her head toward the window. I'd be lying if I said part of me wasn't curious. What made a monster, a monster? Was there more to her than just the mind behind her manipulation? "You should just take me home with you," she suggested casually. "Tell your boss that I'm in here, and I'm sure we could have lots of fun together." I couldn't help but respond, "Yeah, I'm sure you'd make great kindling for a fire." She laughed. "Oh ho ho, you're so funny. I like you. You know, I was thinking I'd have someone kill you eventually. But maybe I'll keep you around." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't just kill everyone?" "Of course not. I like to let the really bad ones live a little longer. It's more fun that way." The words hung in the air, and something about them annoyed me. I turned to her sharply. "What do you mean by that? Are you saying I'm a bad person?" Delilah's eyes glinted with amusement. "You're not quite on my level yet, but I see potential in you." You didn't even scream when you saw my work. Maybe you even enjoyed seeing it. You might think we're different, but we really aren't." Her words hit harder than I cared to admit. She was right. I hadn't screamed. A month ago, I would have been sickened by what I saw in that house. But now, I was numb. I wasn't sure if that was for the worse or the better. I kept my focus on the road, not wanting to let her provoke me any further. "I'm definitely changing. And I don't think it's for the good," I muttered under my breath. "What are you?" I finally asked after a few minutes of silence. "Look into my eyes, and I'll tell you," she taunted. "Nice try." "I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid," I responded, almost laughing. "What are you afraid of? Do you think you'd see yourself if you looked into my eyes?" She fell silent, and I felt the tension between us rise. "That's enough," I said, breaking the silence with a firm voice. "One more word and I'm Googling where the nearest wood chipper is." Those were the last words spoken on our little road trip. I dropped Delilah off and informed my superiors about the mess in the house. They told me they'd send someone to clean it up. I was hoping for a break after all that I had seen, but no such luck. As soon as I turned in Delilah, they handed me my next assignment. Codename, Jack. What a name. This was probably the oddest assignment I had received yet. Jack was, as far as I could tell, entirely human. I had no clue why they wanted me to find him. Maybe he was a runaway scientist or someone who knew too much. Either way, he was definitely dangerous, and they didn't want him alive. They wanted him dead. And that just made me more curious about what secrets Jack was hiding. Jack was constantly on the move, so finding him wasn't easy. But with my training, I eventually tracked him down. I watched him for a while. He didn't seem dangerous, just suspicious and cautious, but nothing that screamed threat to me. One night, he stepped out of his hotel room to get food. I figured it was time for us to talk. When Jack returned to his room and saw me sitting on the couch, he wasn't surprised. He just shrugged. So, they did send someone for me after all. Go ahead. Do what you have to do. I motioned for him to sit down. I just want to talk. Jack raised an eyebrow, a curious one. Huh? You know what they say about curiosity. I rolled my eyes, but motioned for him to sit down anyway. Who are you, Jack? Why did they send me after you? Jack sighed, his tone almost resigned. You don't know? I used to be one of you. They told you where to go, who to kill, who to bring back alive. And we did it, no questions asked. But I couldn't handle it anymore. So here I am. Jack's words hit harder than I thought. His resignation, his acceptance of his fate, it all made sense now. There really was no way out of this life, other than death. I processed his final words, realizing I had killed someone who had been in the same position as me. As I stood across the room, gun in hand, I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger, and Jack's body dropped, lifeless. I had the answers I came here for. Perhaps Delilah was right, maybe we weren't so different after all. I returned to my agency with Jack's body. Strangely, there was no usual debriefing. I was simply given a nod and told to go home and wait for my next assignment. I was a bit confused, but the thought lingered, was this another task? Honestly, if it was, I had no doubts I'd passed with flying colors. I know some of you may think less of me for the choices I've made, but here's the thing, if it wasn't me, it would be someone else. This is the life I chose, or perhaps the life that was chosen for me. There's no backing down now. I'm just another discardable person in the grand scheme of things. And don't mistake my actions for blind loyalty. I know the people I work for aren't good, but I know my place. The moment I stop being useful, I'll end up like Jack. How does that saying go again? Better the devil you know than the devil you don't? Well, I'm a cog in a giant machine. Once my cog stops working, I'll be discarded and replaced. Despite the fact that I risk death every day I wake up, there's a part of me that's never felt more alive. I've stopped having nightmares about those I've killed. I no longer care about things like that. If I become too soft, though, I'll end up like Jack. I have no intentions of letting that happen. After disposing of Jack, I was given a week off. It had been a while since I had any time to myself. It felt strange. I had never had many friends, and my work had distanced me from my few remaining family members. That week off made me realize just how empty my life really was. Was this what they had wanted? Regardless, my week was up, and I was ready for my next assignment. The next task was codename Mimic. The name alone gave me chills. Mimic was a master of disguise, capable of morphing her face into an exact replica of anyone she chose. However, she couldn't change her body. I imagine she's still a work in progress, but imagine what the government could do with such a power. They could create perfect body replicas of anyone. It's no wonder they wanted her, along with a few other escaped experiments. She was top priority. Mimic had no family, so she would have to find a way to hide, probably breaking into somewhere or taking refuge in an abandoned place. If she had escaped the city, we would never find her. However, the government had set up roadblocks at all exits, and us hunters had been split up to search the city. There were 4 of us, and each one of us had a quadrant to cover. The only way we would be able to identify her was by a distinct scar on her left shoulder. I spent hours scouring the streets of my quadrant, asking strangers if they'd seen a suspicious-looking woman and checking old, abandoned homes. But I found nothing. That is, until I was approached by a slender, young man in his early 20s. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked, his voice light. "Yeah," I replied. "It's hard to explain. I'm looking for a girl, but I'm not sure what she looks like." The man chuckled. "Well, I may be able to help. I saw a girl run into an old abandoned building around the corner. She was acting pretty weird, constantly looking over her shoulder. Maybe she's the one you're looking for?" I didn't think twice before pushing past him. "Thanks. I have to go check right now." I hurried to the building he had mentioned. Letting myself in, I was shocked to find Mimic, but not in the way I expected. She was tied to a chair. I knew it was her immediately, her scar was in clear view. No other hunters had contacted me to say they had found her, so it had to be her. As the strange man walked through Mimic and disappeared, my mind raced. How had he gotten in front of me so quickly? Why did he seem to know so much about me and Delilah? His cryptic message about her coming for me sent a chill down my spine. This situation had turned bizarre, and I didn't know who to trust anymore. I quickly refocused. There was still a job to do, and Mimic, tied to the chair, was my target. I had to deliver her back to the agency, despite all the confusion surrounding the stranger and Delilah's cryptic message. Once I returned to the holding facility, I found everything in complete chaos. The facility was on lockdown, and the building had been partially destroyed. The eerie sight of dead scientists and guards scattered around was unsettling, but I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. These people weren't exactly saints. I located one of my superiors, who filled me in on what had happened. The group that attacked the facility had clearly been after a specific experiment, though no one could say which one. Between 20 and 50 experiments had escaped. When I asked which ones, I was told it was classified. All I was told to do was leave Mimic with them and go home to wait for further instructions. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. It wasn't lost on me that Delilah could very well be one of the experiments that escaped. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Days passed after the attack. The facility was still in disarray, and I was temporarily sent home as the government worked on managing the fallout. With half of the building destroyed, there wasn't much point in hunting down the escapees until they had a safe place to store them. But eventually, the call came. My phone rang, and I was ordered to join a team of 3 other hunters to track down the escaped experiments. To my dismay, Delilah was on the list. She couldn't move on her own, so she must have been with one of the other experiments who had escaped. The thought of what might happen next filled me with dread. Who could she be with? Who was helping her? I flipped through the list, searching for the man I had seen with Mimic, the one who knew Delilah and had somehow passed through her. I was sure he was involved in whatever was happening now. The thought of facing him again, along with Delilah, made my skin crawl. The room was thick with tension, and I could feel the cold weight of the situation pressing in around me. I could barely move, my limbs stiff and bound to the chair as the man from before, the one who seemed to phase in and out of existence, watched me with an unsettling calm. His mocking words bounced around my mind, only deepening the confusion I felt. Delilah. The demonic doll, the one I thought I was done with. The one I couldn't escape. There she was, her gaze a haunting void. And then, the man's cruel words echoed in my mind. Did you really miss me that much? Did I miss you? I repeated, trying to steady my breath, but my voice shook with frustration. The situation was spiraling out of my control. The man was playing with me, but I had to get to the heart of this. I needed to understand what was really happening. I turned my attention to Delilah. She was still mostly concealed, her eyes barely visible beneath the ragged cloth she wore. The way she sat there, lifeless but full of malevolent energy, made my skin crawl. She didn't speak right away, but I could sense her presence, cold and unforgiving. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and full of a dark resignation. Can you just kill me already, or do whatever you're going to do with me? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What had happened to her? To the Delilah I had once known, the one who had seemed more human despite her sinister nature? This Delilah was different, broken, resigned to some fate worse than death. The man chuckled darkly. Oh, I don't think you really want that, Delilah. You don't get to die that easily. He turned his eyes to me, almost as if daring me to respond. And as for you, it looks like you're in a bit of a predicament. Maybe you're not as valuable as you thought, I couldn't stand the mocking tone any longer. What do you want from us? I demanded, struggling against my restraints. The man's smile widened, but his gaze remained unsettlingly calm. I'm just here to make sure Delilah gets what she wants. It seems she's done playing the game with you. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What was he implying? What had happened to the Delilah I knew? And who exactly was this man, with his eerie ability to phase through walls and his cryptic messages? Before I could ask more, the door to the cabin creaked open, and I froze. My heart raced. Was it another trap? Or had Delilah finally made her move? The air outside was thick with the sound of my tires screeching against the cracked, desolate road as I drove away from the burning cabin. My heart pounded in my chest, but a part of me felt strangely liberated. It wasn't about escape anymore. I wasn't running to save myself from the government or the horrors they had unleashed on me. I was running to be free, free from the experiments, free from Delilah, and free from everything they had turned me into. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, watching as the flames from the cabin flickered, consuming everything inside, including the twisted world I had been dragged into. The people there, some victims, others just like me, were no longer a concern. What mattered now was that I was no longer bound by their rules. I wasn't their weapon anymore. But I couldn't forget the look in Delilah's eyes, the void of evil, the endless tragedies etched in those empty pupils. She was out there, somewhere, just as deadly and unpredictable as ever. The truth, however, was that I was done. The government, Delilah, and all the dark forces I'd been involved with, they had no hold on me anymore. I might be hunted, but they wouldn't control me. My life was my own again, and no one was going to take that from me. I didn't care if they came after me. Let them. I was done being a puppet, done being part of their sick games. No more experiments, no more lies, and certainly no more hunting. As the miles passed, I thought about what I would do next. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I could no longer be their weapon. And that, I knew, was the first step toward truly being free. I didn't know what was coming, but whatever it was, I was ready.